So welcome to this presentation on Chartered Statistician revalidation, which aims to pull together information on the revalidation process, and in doing so, hopefully answer any questions you may have about the process in general and how it affects you in particular. My name is Trevor Lewis, and I serve on the Professional Affairs Committee, which is the body in the RSS that has designed the revalidation process and is responsible for its implementation. Like all members of the Professional Affairs Committee, I am a Chartered Statistician, and I'm also a Chartered Scientist. My career as a statistician has included 8 years in academia, followed by 22 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and most recently 12 years working as an independent statistical consultant. In the presentation today, I will cover both processes being undertaken this year for Chartered Statisticians who have a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2019. That is the process for statisticians who do not also hold the Chartered Scientist Award, the CSci Award, and a separate process for those who do also hold the CSci Award. Recall Chartered Scientist is an award of the Science Council, which the RSS has been licensed to offer since 2008. As already mentioned, please raise your questions either using the icon at the bottom left during the presentation if you have any written questions, or we can raise questions verbally at the end of the meeting by unmuting. Okay, moving on then to the outline of the presentation, which is shown on this slide. So we will start with an overview of revalidation for the CStat and CSci awards. We will then go into some detail on the revalidation process being adopted in 2018 for the cohort who have a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2019, highlighting the distinction between the process for those CStats not holding the CSci award, which for shorthand we'll refer to as the CStat revalidation process, and the process for those CStats who also hold the CSci award, which for shorthand we will refer to as the CSci revalidation process. You may recall we announced the introduction of revalidation for CStat at the beginning of 2012, with the first cohort undertaking revalidation in 2014. So we will summarize the outcome of the first 4 cohorts to go through the revalidation process in 2014, 15, 16, and 17. Hopefully this will give a sense of how revalidation operates and the possible outcomes for those members involved in the process. Revalidation is based largely on continuing professional development, so we will then say a little about the recording and scope of CPD. This is the aspect about which most questions are raised. And finally, we will cover the support materials that are available to help you with maintaining a record of your CPD, ensuring your CPD is supportive of your career development, and ensuring that you understand the requirements for revalidation. Okay, moving on then to the third slide. In order to give an overview of the CStat and CSci revalidation processes, we will cover the following 5 questions. What is revalidation? Who needs to undertake revalidation? Why did we introduce revalidation for CStat? What is the basis of revalidation? And how does the CStat revalidation 5-year cycle operate? So first of all, the first of those questions, what is revalidation? So revalidation is the process to be successfully completed in order to retain CStat professionally active status or CSci status. Sometimes such a process is referred to as renewal or reaccreditation, but the RSS chose the term revalidation. The aim is to confirm maintenance of professional standards by declaration or by providing evidence. Revalidation is a form of professional appraisal carried out by the society. And in this respect, you may want to compare it with the performance appraisal carried out by an employer. So the focus of revalidation is professionalism in your working life, whereas the focus of an employer's performance appraisal is the achievement of goals and the development of skills and knowledge in support of goal delivery. And on the final bullet on this slide, then, by professionalism, we're focusing on being trustworthy, ethical, up-to-date, and competent, which is a shorthand for the approach to professional life, which is codified in the Society's Code of Conduct. Okay, to my second question then, who needs to undertake revalidation? So let's say a little about, let's start off then at the beginning. Who needs to undertake revalidation? It is the professionally active Chartered Statisticians. So let's say a little bit about then the exceptions, that is, those who do not participate in the standard CStat revalidation process. Well, we will first of all should note that those professionally active Chartered Statisticians who also hold the Chartered Scientist Award undertake the Science Council's annual revalidation process rather than the Chartered Statistician revalidation process, which runs on a 5-year cycle. Successful completion of the Science Council process, which is administered by the RSS, serves the needs for maintaining both CSci and CStat awards. And this is the process we referred to earlier as the CSci revalidation process. Looking at the second bullet on the right then, for those on a career break or with extenuating circumstances, revalidation may be deferred. So each case is treated on its merits, but in general, deferment may be the best course of action if the career break or extenuating circumstances cover a period including a substantial part of the last 12 months. The third bullet then, for those permanently retired or those who have had a permanent career change away from statistics, there is no need to undertake revalidation in order to retain CStat status. Although in this case, the professional register, which is available on the RSS website, will indicate that you are no longer professionally active as a statistician. And then the final category are those professionally qualified fellows who retain the professional qualifications of the Institute of Statisticians, MIS and FIS, at the time of the merger with the Royal Statistical Society way back in 1993. And they do not have to undertake revalidation to retain the MIS and FIS awards. So moving on to my third question then, why revalidation for CStat? Fundamentally, it was a part of our strategy to raise the status and value of the award, both to those holding the award and to the beneficiaries of their work, be they employers, clients, funders, colleagues, students, etc. Specifically, revalidation increases the credibility of the CStat award as a professional award, as it says something about your capability today rather than at the time you originally received the award. This view was expressed in a number of discussions held with employers. It also reflects trends in the continuing professional development policy of professional bodies, with a move from policies that were voluntary to mandated approaches that are monitored. Recall that the CPD policy of the Society has been mandatory for professionally qualified fellows since its introduction in 2004, so revalidation is introducing monitoring of an existing mandated policy. And finally, our experience with Chartered Scientist revalidation process, which started before we undertook Chartered Statistician revalidation a couple of years before, that confirmed in our minds the benefits of such a process and our ability to manage an efficient and effective process for our members. My fourth question then, the basis of revalidation. So this slide indicates that the basis of revalidation process is adherence to the code of conduct and compliance with the CPD policy. The former being confirmed primarily by declaration, whereas we will ask for evidence for the latter. The code of conduct was put in place in 1993 at the time of the merger with the Institute of Statisticians and has been mandated for Chartered Statisticians since that date and was revised in 2014. There is a phrase in the original code which states, "Fellows shall seek to upgrade their professional knowledge and skill and shall maintain awareness of technological developments, procedures and standards which are relevant to their field." This was expanded upon by the CPD policy of the Society, which was introduced in 2004 and revised in 2009. We will come back to say a little bit more about the CPD policy later in the presentation, and we will also give links to the Code of Conduct and the CPD policy from the RSS website. My fifth point then was with regard to the 5-year cycle. So this schematic of the 5-year cycle is for the standard CStat revalidation process. The expectation is that in compliance with the CPD policy, Chartered Statisticians will prepare a CPD summary in each year. For most members, the CPD summary will serve multiple purposes, as well as satisfying the requirements of the CPD policy of the Society, and hence their revalidation needs. It will also serve to support their employer's appraisal process and be part of their up-to-date CV and professional profile, and support their development and career planning. Although you will prepare a CPD summary for each year, you should not submit anything to the Society until you receive a request at the beginning of year 5. For those of you with a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2019, 2018 is your year 5. And note for the annual CSci revalidation process, every year is essentially a year 5. Now on this side, you'll see a breakdown of the revalidation activities this year for those of you with a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2019. Note that the first column gives the list of activities in the revalidation process. The second column gives the dates for the process for those CStats who do not hold the CSci award and for whom this is year 5 of the 5-year revalidation cycle. And the third column gives the dates for the process for those holding both CStat and CSci awards who are subject to an annual revalidation process. You will notice that the CStat revalidation process takes place in the first half of the year, and the CSci revalidation process takes place in the second half of the year. So going through the common set of activities for both processes, focusing on the similarities of the processes, the differences in detail we'll mention later on. So in January, you will have received an email outlining the precise program of revalidation activities and a link to the relevant information on the RSS website. Moving to the second row, by email, you will be alerted to the need to make your initial submission, which will involve making a choice of one of three options and providing some basic information. So for those in the CStat revalidation process, this was included in the January email. For those in the CSci process, this will be an email sent out at the end of August. So responding to this request, this is what all that you'll need to do for most of you. Feedback on this submission will be provided, including an indication of whether you have been selected for audit. And the selection of members for audit will be in part risk-based and in part random selection. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through. We may vary the percentage selected for audit, but typically we select between 10 and 15%. Those selected for audit will be notified and will be required to make their audit submission by the deadline stated. And the panel of assessors will then meet and provide specific feedback on the audit submission to those selected for audit. Note that only those activities highlighted in a reddish colour require members to do work. And hopefully these last 5 or 6 slides that we've been through have given an overview of the general CStat and CSci revalidation processes. So we'll now focus on the detail of the CStat revalidation process to be carried out this year, and then we'll comment on the difference between that detail and the corresponding CSci revalidation process. So this next slide is the same as the preceding slide, only I've highlighted the middle column because that's where we're going to focus attention. And so the purpose of going through this slide is to run through the precise dates when activities need to be completed by. So the January email not only outlined the process, but also served to initiate the process and requested a choice of one of 3 options, option A, B, or C. And although we give you until the end of March to respond, it is best to respond as soon as possible so this request doesn't get lost in your to-do list. Responding to this email really shouldn't take too much effort at all. During April, we will respond and indicate whether you have been selected for audit. And if you're not selected for audit, then the process for you is complete at this point. Those selected for audit are given precise information on what is required to be submitted, are directed to support materials, which might be helpful, and are given a deadline for submission of the end of June. The panel of assessors meet over the summer and will provide feedback on the outcome of the audit assessment by early September at the latest. So now let's move on to say a little more about the initial submission. This is the audit submission, the submission that has been requested in the January email and needs to be delivered by the end of March. This slide briefly describes the 3 options that members are asked to choose from in their initial submission. So option A is to make a declaration and return a CPD summary for 2017. That declaration is a declaration of being professionally active, complying with the CPD policy, and adhering to the Code of Conduct. Option B is selected by those who wish to continue to hold CStat award, but cannot make the declaration because of a career break, extenuating circumstances, a career change, or retirement. So all of those possibilities would lead them to not being professionally active. So they wish to retain the CStat, but are not professionally active, and so they need to tell us about their circumstances. And option C is for those who do not wish to revalidate. So let's look at this in more detail for each of the options. So the next slide shows option A. So there are three parts to this option, and I'll read through them. So what is the declaration that people make if they choose option A? I would like to revalidate and continue to hold the Chartered Statistician Award from the 1st of January 2019 until my next revalidation date. I affirm that I will continue to be professionally active, comply with the RSS CPD policy, adhere to the RSS Code of Conduct. And if my professional circumstances change such that I am not able to fulfill the above obligations, then I will contact the Society immediately. And I attach my CPD summary for the calendar year 2017 with my reply. Remember, when you do this, if you choose option A, to label your CPD summary with your surname and membership number so that we can readily identify it as yours. We will be getting something like 30 of these during the CStat revalidation process this year. So as indicated on the slide, if you select this option, you may be selected for audit and be required to submit further information about your professional experience and development from 2014 to 17. You'll be notified whether you've been selected for audit during April. Okay then, so moving on to option B. So for this, the response is, I wish to continue to hold my Chartered Statistician Award. However, due to a career break, extenuating circumstances, career change or retirement, I'm unable to make the declaration described in option A. So as indicated on the slide, if you select this option, we would ask you to provide an explanation of your circumstances. Note the guidance allows the Society the discretion to defer revalidation for up to 3 years in the cases of career breaks or extenuating circumstances. And in the case of a permanent career change or retirement from professional activity, your Chartered Statistician status can be retained and revalidation is no longer required. However, if you select this final option, your entry on the professional register will reflect the fact that you're not professionally active as a statistician. Now, maybe while we have this slide here, maybe I should try and clarify what is meant by retirement, because we get a number of questions around this. It means that you cease to be professionally active. So if you are performing a role that requires you to keep your knowledge and competence up to date, then you would not be considered retired. So the role does not need to be full-time or paid work, and so members who are engaged in volunteering or outreach or consultancy, for example, should consider themselves as professionally active and undertake relevant CPD. In contrast, someone who is reading journals and attending lectures out of personal interest, but is no longer actively contributing to the profession, either through paid employment or volunteering of some kind, they would not be considered professionally active, and so would fall into the retired category. And finally then, option C. This is where the response is, I do not wish to revalidate, as I do not wish to continue to hold the Chartered Statistician Award beyond the end of this year. So as indicated on this slide, if you select this option, it would be useful for the Society to know the primary reason for your decision. So we'd ask you to provide a comment to that effect. Now, our experience from the revalidation process in previous years is that a small number of members select this option because of a misunderstanding of the revalidation requirements. And we're keen to make sure that members only choose this option fully understanding the other options that are available. Okay, so in summary then, we require the option choice A, B or C by the end of March. And if no response is received, unfortunately, we have to assume option C has been selected. Okay, so this is the first stage of the process. So let's return to what happens next. That is after the initial submission and option choice has been made by the end of March. So this is returning to the slide we've previously seen, and we need to now look in the middle of the slide at the row between the two reddish rows. Between the two reddish rows. So in April, we will assess the CPD returns from those who selected option A. The feedback we will provide initially will be overall feedback on the quality of the set of CPD submissions that we've received. And once you have received this general feedback, if you would like specific feedback on your submission, just let us know and we will provide it. We will also let you know whether or not you've been selected for audit. And if you've been selected, guidance on what you need to do. Now, typically, those selected for audit in the CStat revalidation process are selected because of a shortfall in their initial submission, leaving some uncertainty as to whether they are complying with the Society's CPD policy. So if you see there is some incentive to make a good initial submission. If you have selected option B, we will confirm receipt in April or before and indicate our response to your explanation of your circumstances. So if you've indicated that you're on a career break or have extenuating circumstances, we will recommend an approach to possible deferment of your revalidation. And as mentioned earlier, deferment is likely to be the recommended course of action if your career break or extenuating circumstance are recent or current. If you have indicated that you are now permanently retired or have permanently moved away from a career in statistics, we will confirm receipt and update the professional register to reflect the fact that you are retired or have had a career change and so are not professionally active as a statistician. And finally then, if you have selected option C, what do we do in April? Well, we confirm receipt and confirm that your CStat status will cease at the end of the year. We will also clarify the possibility of reapplying for CStat status in the future. So just to confirm then that if you were not selected for audit, the process completes for you at this point, and your revalidation date would normally be reset to, in this case, for this year, it'll be the 1st of January 2024. If you had selected option A, of course. So let's now look at the audit process, which is the process that follows on from April through to the end of June. So the next slide here indicates in a schematic the information that we would ask to see if you've been selected for audit. So the aim here is to collect information about your CPD activities over the calendar years 2014 to 17, or a subset of those years. So you'll be pleased to know that we mention a subset of those years, and we'll clarify in a moment. And to ensure that your program of CPD is in line with the expectations of the Society's CPD policy. So if we go around this schematic, starting top left, in particular, we are concerned to confirm that the CPD that you have undertaken is aligned with your needs relating to your current job role or your career aspirations. So we ask for a career status summary, and for most people, this can easily be extracted from their CV. Then moving to the top right box, we ask for a CPD summaries for a subset of the years 2014 to 17. Now, if we follow the pattern of previous years, we will only require a summary for 2017, but suggest you submit other years' summaries as well as 2017 if 2017 is unrepresentative of your professional development. Note that you will have submitted a 2017 summary in the initial step, and we may give some suggestions for improving the information provided in your summary in order to ensure that the audit submission satisfies the assessor's need for information for them to make a proper assessment. The bottom left panel then talks about reflective practice. We also ask for you to reflect on how your program of CPD activities have supported the development of relevant skills, knowledge and experience, and how it has helped you to deliver to the customers of your service. These customers might be project teams that you work in, clients that you do consultancy for, students whose research you support or who you teach, or colleagues that you collaborate with, supervise or mentor. Okay, so we expect some information or reflection simply to clarify that the CPD activities have been supportive of you in your current and future job roles. And on the bottom right then, finally, we ask for a list of supporting information that could be provided, if requested, to clarify or confirm the information that you have given. So one of the questions that we often get asked about when people we request this additional information for audit is about confidentiality. Now, the information you provide will be treated in the strictest confidence, and even for people working with confidential information in government or commercially confidential information in the private sector, we have found ways to overcome these concerns. We also provide the option for you to give a referee who is able to confirm your information rather than providing the assessment panel with access to confidential reports. So then, just to summarize, that if you are selected for audit, we will expect you to provide a CPD summary. We also expect you to complete a revalidation form which captures the information that are on this current slide. So on the next slide then, we just talk about the revalidation form. This is a template that enables you to provide the information in a way that is efficient and useful for you and also for the panel of assessors. Now, the form has 7 sections as indicated on the right-hand side of this slide. The only one I have not talked about so far is the section on development planning. And this is included simply to encourage you to be thinking ahead about your future development needs. And note that the revalidation form described on this slide is already available to download from the web page at the top of this slide. So that's the web page for the CStat revalidation process. There's a slightly different revalidation form for the CSci revalidation process, and that's from the web page, which is /CSci-revalidation. So to reiterate, if selected for audit, the audit submission will need to be provided by the end of June, and the panel of assessors will provide feedback by early September. Okay, so we've been through the CStat revalidation process, so let's now just clarify what is the difference between that and the CSci revalidation process. So this slide gives the comparison, and we're going to step through it row by row with the comparison. So the typical revalidation cycle for CStat process is 5 years, whereas for CSci process, it's an annual process. The CSci process runs in the first half of the year, whereas the CSci process runs in the second half of the year, August through to December. The initial submission option A requires submission of a CPD summary for the CStat process, whereas only a declaration is required for the CSci process. And partly because of this, but there are other reasons as well, which we can discuss later, the audit sample selected for the CStat process is primarily risk-based, whereas for the CSci process, it is primarily random. The annual CPD summaries for the CStat process are based on calendar years, whereas the CPD summary for the CSci process runs from the previous October through to September inclusive. And if a member in the CStat process indicates that they have recently retired, then they switch to their status to retired, not professionally active. Whereas in the CSci process, they lose CSci status and switch to the retired CStat status. This is because CStat, to hold the CSci award, according to the Science Council's criteria, you need to be professionally active. They don't have any options for those who may have retired. So if a member withdraws, let's choose option C, this is the final point, or fails revalidation in the CStat process, then they lose their CStat status. In the CSci process, they lose their CSci status and drop into the CStat revalidation process. So they don't lose both awards with failure there. They drop into the CStat revalidation process and will typically need to submit a CPD summary the following year as part of that process. So let's now then see how these differences between the process have manifested themselves in the outcome of the revalidation processes over the past 4 years. And again, we'll start off with the CStat revalidation process. Okay, so we're now going to look back at the results over the past 4 years. So on this side, you'll see the numbers of professionally active chartered statisticians in the first 4 cohorts undergoing revalidation in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, and the outcome of the revalidation processes. So the cohorts then are given in the heading line, 175 in 2014, 220 in 2015, 308 in 2016, and then 49 in 2017. So to explain the differences in those cohort sizes, let me just say a little bit of detail then. So for the first 3 cohorts, 2014 to 16, these were the professionally active statisticians who had received their CStat awards prior to 2012, when revalidation was introduced. So these cohorts included those who were awarded CStat status in 1993, when the award was initiated, following the merger of the RSS and the Institute of Statisticians, and in the subsequent years, some of which were prior to there being a CPD policy established in 2004. So the information for these 3 cohorts is combined to avoid cluttering the slide, but you'll see that the subdivided information is there if you wish to have a look at it. Note that for now we're discussing the process undertaken by those not holding the Chartered Scientist Award. We'll come to that in a couple of slides' time. So let's just run through the rows on this slide. So the first row shows the number and percentage fully satisfying the revalidation requirements and for whom their revalidation date moved forward 5 years. The second row indicates the number partially satisfying the requirements, and so their revalidation was progressed, but not by the full 5 years, by 2 or 3 years. The third row indicates the number for whom revalidation was deferred for 1 year due to extenuating circumstances. So these first 3 rows indicate that in 2014 to 16, 65% continued as professionally active CStats, and in 2017, 61% continued as professionally active CStats. Now in the next 2 rows, they indicate those who retain CStat status, but for whom their professional register entry indicated that they were not professionally active as statisticians. A temporary state for those on a career break, but typically permanent for those undertaking a career change or moving into retirement. And the final row in the table indicates those who withdrew or failed revalidation, primarily because they failed to respond to multiple communications, but also because they contacted us to indicate that they do not wish to continue to be chartered. So these figures are overall figures, and they include the outcome for those selected for audit, as well as those who simply needed to undertake the first stage of revalidation. I'm happy for us to discuss the details of those numbers in the Q&A if you wish, but for now, let's simply move on and look at the outcome of the audit. Remember, typically in the CStat revalidation process, members are audited if their initial CPD submission really wasn't of a standard such that we could confirm compliance with the CPD policy of the Society. So what are the numbers like on this? You'll see that roughly it's about 10% of those eligible for audit, i.e. 10% of those who've selected option A. And if we go through the individual rows, those fully satisfying the audit requirements include members who were given feedback on improvement areas. Also, one or two of them may have been asked for additional information before final assessment was made by the panel. The second row are those partially meeting the requirements and were also given feedback of improvement in areas, and also why they were not being revalidated for a full 5 years. And the third row indicates 3 individuals who I guess demonstrate that we're trying to be supportive in the revalidation process. For 2 of these members, it became apparent during the audit process that it would be better to defer their revalidation due to a career break in one case and due to extenuating circumstances in the other case. And there was also, it became apparent that one member, that retired status was more appropriate for that individual. And those indicated as failing, they just declined to provide the requested information. So that's the CStat revalidation process. So here are the numbers for the CSci process. This is a little different in context, and I'll explain that as we go through. Note that in this case, successfully completing the process advances the revalidation date only by 12 months for those with both CSci and CStat. And note that the vast majority of members in the 2014 cohort are also included in the subsequent cohorts. So whereas for the CStat revalidation process, each year was essentially a different set of individuals, for the CSci cohort, because it's an annual process rather than on a 5-year cycle, it's essentially largely the same set of individuals going through the process. Obviously, there is some change because there are some new CSIs coming into the process, and there are some who give up the CSI status, but by and large, the vast majority are the same set of individuals. Right, so if we look in the table, the first row, which is in the darker blue color, indicates the overall outcome for the process. And you'll see that in these cohorts, somewhere between 92 and 98% successfully complete the process. And note that to retain CSI status, members must be professionally active. And so some of those who do not successfully complete the process fail simply because of retirement and so ceasing to be professionally active. The subsequent rows show the outcome of the audit process carried out in each of the 4 years. And you'll see 10 members failed the audit process over the 4 years due to failure to submit the requested information. And I don't propose to go through the detail of the other lines, but you'll see that for this process, typically the majority of people are randomly selected, and the majority of people typically have a positive outcome from the audit process. But I would need to stress again that failure of the CSI revalidation process leads to ceasing to hold the CSI award. However, CStat award is retained, and members switching into the CStat revalidation process or switching to one of the not professionally active CStat categories. If they are professionally active, their new revalidation date will be dependent on the stage at which they withdrew from the CSI status or failed revalidation, and also their audit history as part of the CSI process. So this completes the look at previous years, and hopefully gives a sense of how the process works and the possible outcomes. Okay, so these have been really overviews. So let's now start talking about specifically about the information that you need to provide. And so we need to talk in detail about continuing professional development, the recording of which and the summarising of which underpins the revalidation process. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip over the next slide and move on to a slide recording your CPD. So as part of the revalidation process, you need to record your CPD. And this slide is intended to do two things. First of all, to emphasize that the Society is quite happy for you to record your CPD in whatever way is convenient to you, and also to point out the requirements of the CPD policy of the Society. So the flexibility is shown on the left-hand panel and the requirements on the right-hand panel. I guess in summary, there's flexibility in format. However, there is a requirement in the content of the summary, and I'll come on in detail about that. So let's talk about the left-hand panel, which is the flexibility. The RSS, although allows flexibility, does advocate two recording formats. There is the RSS online CPD system, which can be accessed through My RSS, quite easy to access through there. And if you use that system, it leads you through providing the information that you'll need for audit purposes. There is also an MS Word template in which you can record your CPD activities, and this can be downloaded from the RSS website. And the link for that I will show later on. Some members find it convenient to use their employer's CPD system. Others design their own CPD system for their own convenience. I guess the point I need to make is that if you use your employer's or personal one, you need to check that the recording that you're doing captures all of the information that is required to confirm compliance with the Society's CPD policy. And that information is captured on the right-hand side there, where it indicates that you need to allocate your activities to categories, and we'll come on to say a little bit about that categorization in a moment. And in a 12-month period, the expectation is that you carry out activities in at least 3 of the 5 categories, that you indicate how many learning hours those activities undertake, and there's an expectation that you will undertake at least 60 learning hours of activities. Again, the definition of learning hours is captured in the CPD policy of the Society, and I'll show you where to find out about that. And that there is reflective practice, that is to say, as well as recording the activity and describing it, there is an assessment of the value of the activity, that is, the outcome and benefit of the activity. So one of the things that I think is worth stressing is the scope of activities that can be captured in your CPD summary. And this is what this slide is starting to hope to clarify. Now, through this slide, the main point I want to make here is that CPD is not restricted to the development of technical skills and knowledge. Typically, you need a broader set of knowledge and skill than just technical in order to ensure that your input is relevant, makes an impact, and is effective. So just working up this pyramid from the bottom, to be relevant, you need a knowledge of the context in which you're working. This context knowledge involves any legal or regulatory framework that affects the sector in which you're working, any standards that are established by your sector or employer for how work gets done. And in addition, it involves gaining and maintaining knowledge of the business setting in which you're working, whether that's the business of education, the business of government, the business of pharmaceutical R&D, or the business of operating as an independent statistical consultant. And also knowledge of the scientific, medical, or social context in which data are collected, either by survey or experimentation. So in order to make your contribution relevant, knowledge of the context in which you're working is very important. Now, to make an impact, you need the interpersonal skills to effectively communicate with co-workers and deliver your technical contribution. Now, many statisticians work in multidisciplinary teams, and in this context, your team working and leadership skills are valuable to ensure that the team as a whole delivers and that your statistical contribution enhances team performance and the quality of the team output. And finally, then, at the top of the pyramid, depending on the size and nature of your organization in which you work, there will be processes in place to support people and deliver tasks. Knowledge of these processes and the skills to manage, facilitate, or operate within them can greatly increase the effectiveness of the contribution you make. So the point then is that CPD, the activities you record, cover the developing and maintenance of knowledge, skill, and experience in all of these areas. So the next slide here, you can see, just summarizes those points about competence, relevance, impact, and effectiveness. So then let's just refer to this categorization, which we mentioned a couple of slides ago. So the expectation from the CPD policy of the Society is that you'll have taken advantage of activities in at least 3 of these 5 categories. Now, it's in the appendix of the CPD policy that you'll see a definition of each of these categories and a series of examples. So that's the place to look if you want greater clarification on this categorization. Now, the principal value of the categorization is to demonstrate the broad range of activities that can be used to support your professional development. But there's 2 specific points I'd make here. Firstly, formal training sessions do contribute towards your CPD, but they are by no means the only way of doing so and will typically make only a minor contribution towards your overall CPD program. Secondly, do not forget about the major contribution that work-based learning can make towards your CPD. However, you can make some mistake in how you record activities around work-based learning. Some people incorrectly totally ignore the category of learning, whereas others equally incorrectly list all the activities that appear in their job description. Now, typically it is the case that many activities in your job role do have a learning component, and it is legitimate to count these in your CPD summary. However, it is only a proportion of the time you spend on these activities that typically has a learning value, hence the concept of learning hours described in the CPD policy of the Society. Now, it is worth saying here that it is possible to make the case for a particular activity to fall into more than one category. So don't get hung up on the categorization, just allocate an activity to a category you can justify. The key point is that you should be thinking of using the full range of activities available to you to support your professional development. So to bring this together then, when you make your CPD summaries for the 12-month period, what information is being needed? What are the assessors looking for? So this is a schematic of the Word template that can be found on the RSS website. So let me just take you through it then. So what are the assessors looking for? In the top right, a brief description of your current role and how it has evolved over the 12-month period being assessed. This enables the context of your CPD to be understood and the relevance of your CP activities to your job role. And then for each activity you have undertaken, a categorization of the activity. And recall, as I've mentioned, we'd expect you to have activities in at least 3 of the 5 categories. A description of the activity, which is concise but gives sufficient detail so the activity is clearly defined. And it needs to be specific. So it's not acceptable just to say reading journals. We'd like to know which journals and articles on which subjects, and then link back to how that has benefited you in your practice in whatever role you're fulfilling. Start dates and end dates of activities are required so that it can be confirmed that you have a continuous program of CPD activity over the 12-month period. Learning hours we've talked about, they need to be identified. Recall, they're not elapsed hours, and they need to add to more than 60 for the 12-month period. And for each activity in the final column, a concise description of the outcome of the activity, identifying the benefits to your practice, that's the specific skills, knowledge, experience that you have gained, and the benefits of you gaining those skills, knowledge, and experience to the users of your work, be they your employer, your client, your project team, your colleagues, etc. Now, similarly, if you were to use the RSS online CPD system, which you can access through My RSS, then using that system would lead you to provide all of this information that is required for assessment. And in that system, there are 2 reports you would need to print off for the 12-month period, the so-called reviewed activities report and the benefits gained report. So coming to a conclusion then in the presentation, just a brief mention of support information which is available on the website. In the January emails, you'll have been pointed towards the revalidation web pages. You can access the code of conduct from the website and also the CPD policy. And on that link to -CPD, there is also a report which gives additional guidance on the CPD policy itself, on some of the terminology. Things like the categorization and learning hours are described in a little bit more detail in that report. There's also a video demonstrating the use of the RSS online system. And I would emphasize there that when that video was made, it was prior to the upgrade of the website. So you need to skip through the early part of that video, which describes how to get to the online system. Now it's very easy through My RSS, and then focus on the part of the video that talks about the properties of the online system. The CPD activity summary, which was on the previous slide, that's where to find it. And then there are some exemplars. So if you're still not quite sure of what's required in an audit submission, these exemplars can be found on the website. If you need more information about continuing professional development and how to make it effective, there is on the PSF past events webpage a set of slides with extensive notes. This was a presentation given way back in 2012, but still relevant. Remember that the RSS does run many activities which will contribute to your CPD activity profile, and there are a couple of links there which are useful. In particular, I would emphasize the PSF webpage, which talks about future PSF events, and also on the subpage which shows past events, there are webcasts of previous meetings which you might want to include in your CPD program. And last but not least, if you want to contact us, there's an email address there. So finally then, the final summary then, recalls revalidation is a professional appraisal process introduced with the objective of raising the value of CStat and CSci awards. It is intended to be a supportive process to encourage good professional practice. The intention is to minimize the extra work required from those managing their career progression as a professional statistician. It's a 2-stage process, an initial submission for all, and additional information requested from a sample selected for audit. And if you're in doubt about anything about the process that applies to you, whether it's the CStat or the CSci process, then please contact us on pac@rss.org.uk for clarification and support. Let me try and read it. Does promotion into a management position, i.e. no longer hands-on with statistical analysis, mean you have undertaken a career change or no, and are no longer professionally active? So the answer to that is no. Often if you've moved into a management role, your statistical knowledge and expertise will still be called on, maybe in an advisory role. Maybe you won't be specifically doing hands-on analyses or handling data, but you may be advising on design of experiments or surveys, or you may be helping individual statisticians pursue their careers. So in that context, then you would still be considered professionally active. What we tend to look for people who've moved into a management position is that they are still keeping up to date appropriately with their statistical knowledge. So it may be that they are reading some review articles. So for example, when I was in a management role in the pharmaceutical industry, I would be keeping on top of regulatory guidelines which affected the statistical work we did, even though I wasn't on a day-to-day basis conducting statistical analysis. And I would still, in that sense, consider myself to be professionally active as a statistician. Maybe one thing I would like to just point out to you, just because I still look at data with interest, even though I do less and less hands-on data analysis myself these days. You will notice that there is an increase in the percentage of people ceasing to revalidate in 2017. That's the bottom right-hand figure, 37% last year. You may ask the question, well, why? Part of the answer you can see if you look at the line above that, when there were a increased number of people in the the line 3 from the top. You can see that the number of people were allowed to move their revalidation date on by 1 year. That number increased up to 29. Now, the reason for this was because those first 3 cohorts were people who had held the CStat award for a long, long time, and some people chose to revalidate as late as possible, which was 2016. And even when it was as late as possible, came up with extenuating circumstances, so we allowed them to defer for 1 further year. But ultimately, time caught up with them, and so there was a larger number than expected, still only 18, who ceased to revalidate at that point in time. But that's why that number went up in comparison with the 17% in the previous years to 37% in that. So in this current year, where there is no, if you like, further legacy, and it's our final 5th cohort, we would not expect that percentage to be as high as it was last year. Thank you very much for your attention and for joining the meeting. Thank you and goodbye.